Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited about this panel. Of course, RWAs are one of the hottest narratives in town right now, so this is the reason why I would love to introduce you to my fellow panelists, Matt, JP, and usual. I just was you. Pierre. Sorry. Pierre. Okay.
Packed house.
Yeah, so let's get it started. I think it makes most sense if we start with a quick round of introductions. We start with Pierre, so please introduce yourself to the crowd and explain in a few words what Usual is doing in the area of RWAs.
Sure, pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. So, my name is Pierre. I'm the CEO of Usual. So, Usual is a decentralized protocol that uses real-world asset as an underlying and issue a fully decentralized stablecoin that is backed by those real-world assets. The idea is clearly to rebuild Tether fully on-chain with transparency and to distribute the value that are generated by the user. So, Tether and Circle are making a lot of money, more than traditional actors, and the idea is to redistribute this value that have been generated through a governance token to the user of the stablecoin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I work on DeFi BD at Ondo. Ondo is really about bringing, the traditional financial world together with the on-chain financial world. So we call it institutional finance on-chain. To date, we've had 2 very successful tokenized money market funds. They've gone through a couple iterations each, and we have a very large vision for how we're going to expand going forward.
Cool. My name is John, come with JP, CEO and co-founder of Mantra. We're a real-world asset-focused L1, building the Cosmos SDK. Did a little talk earlier about RWAs here. We're also working together with Ondo for some USDY liquidity provision, and looking forward to unpack different RWA initiatives on this panel.
Yeah, let's do it. And I think the first way to kind of settle the ground here to make sure that we are all on the same page here, let's talk a little bit about what RWAs are, because there's still some controversy around it. There are some people who have a certain opinion on what an RWA is, and some people believe that some sort of things that are declared as RWAs aren't actually RWAs. So, such as Kyle Samani. He tweeted a couple of months ago, and I remembered this tweet very well, which was, can we all agree that RWAs are things like USD, Apple, Tesla, etc. on-chain, basically financial assets, and things like whiskey, watches, wine, etc. are not RWAs. They are physical collectibles. Using the same vocabulary to describe financial assets and physical assets is going to lead to a lot of poor logic. What is your take on that, Pierre?
Oh yeah, I'm not the one that will define what is real-world asset, because I think it's a wide range of assets. What I can consider is that clearly when we speak about real-world assets, sometimes we make the confusion and we think about generate treasury bills that are tokenized, but clearly real-world asset is many things. It can be securities, it can be commodities, it are assets that are in TradFi and not compatible with infrastructure on-chain. And so real-world assets in DeFi are mostly various range of assets that are used in TradFi but want to bridge with DeFi. And so for the moment, the most common real-world asset category is T-bill on-chain, because it's most liquid on TradFi, and it will be, I think, the best layer of liquidity in DeFi in the next few years when regulation will be okay, and that's another topic. And so yeah, clearly there is plenty of things behind real-world assets, but the main thing is TVL from T-bill.
Well, I mean, coming from a project that is called an RWA blockchain, I think RWA is a horrible way to describe this sector in the space. In TradFi, RWA means risk-weighted asset, and it's never going to get the adoption that we want it to have if we keep calling it RWA. The last maybe 2 cycles ago, it was STO and security token offering. So all these acronyms kind of suck. We need to do a little bit better at figuring out something that actually describes what we're trying to do a little bit better. I just kind of, put it all into asset tokenization. I would say in general, I think that institutional adoption of real-world assets or tokenization has actually achieved some degree of product market fit. I think there's some statistic that JP Morgan on their Onyx blockchain has tokenized over like $1 trillion of government debt. Obviously, that's not utilized in something that any of us really can interact with, but that's a shitload of money on chain. In the case of kind of retail adoption, frankly, the only one who's really had a significant amount of PMF is Ondo with some of their products, and it's really still a bit of a drop in the ocean, right? So, actually, I'll take that back. USD, if you consider fiat as a a tokenized RWA, then obviously Tether is the king there. But other than that, we haven't really seen tons of it yet in the retail side, and I think that's a factor of regulation, poor user experience still, not really adding a ton of high quality assets on chain. Obviously, T-bills on chain are interesting because it is clearly a high quality asset. I mean, assuming you think the U.S. government's going to be paying you back. Anywho, there's a long way to go, and I think from the retail perspective, that's really where our core focus is. Like, how do we actually make this space adopted? But the whole RWA idea and acronym is shit.
I mean, what is the real world anyway, right? Like, who are like? I've always felt like this term is a little bit disparaging to the crypto native because like, why is Ether not a real world asset? Like, it's very real to me. Like, if you lose your Ether, it's very real to all of us, right? So I think, I like off-chain asset, but unfortunately, then you turn around and tokenize it, it immediately becomes an on-chain asset. So I think, it's obviously it's a spectrum, right? I think tokenized Pokemon cards and watches are like real, but they're not financial assets, right? Tokenized financial products are somewhat less real. They're like numbers in a database at JP Morgan somewhere, but they're also from the off-chain world. So I think, none of these terms are good, right? Security token, like, really didn't go well. Like, can you imagine, like, the SEC now, like, with, like, the current climate, like, saying, like, yeah, I work in security tokens, but don't sue me. I think we've got a long way to go on the terminology, but I also think that like the different products have very different like target audiences. They have very different use cases. So it's maybe like a little bit crazy to try to lump them all into like one category.
Yeah, totally agree on that. But let's move on with like an elevator pitch for RWAs generally, because I remember this phase 2017 and also into the NFT mania when everyone thought, okay, it's a good idea to, tokenize your Rolex or something and put it on chain. A lot of people got annoyed by this idea and said, okay, DeFi is on chain, but the rest, please don't include a blockchain that much. So tokenization moved a little bit into the back, but now it's like back. So what would be your elevator pitch for RWAs? Why do we need to bring property on chain? Why do I need to bring like a real estate in London on chain? Why would that make sense? I think since you did something in Dubai recently.
Let me tell you why we're doing it.
Yeah.
And very specifically how we're doing it, right? So we have a number of different ways that we're tokenizing real estate. And honestly, at the beginning of the year, when we were looking at different products that we could work with and different asset classes that we could support, like we take this very agnostic approach. So we don't really care in the end of the day. But with real estate, it was like one of the ones I was like, everyone's been trying to do this forever. It's honestly pretty freaking boring. It's huge, but does it really need to happen on chain? And then we started talking to some of the developers that we work with, real estate developers that we work with in the UAE, and there was two things that started becoming interesting. One is like the actual true tokenization of like the title deed. So if you're just tokenizing the SPV, or like basically like a real world structure, it's kind of faux tokenization in my opinion. Whereas if you're actually tokenizing the ownership right of that on chain and that's recognized by a sovereign state, like that's real tokenization, right? So you actually own the token and then that gives you the right in the real world that's claimable in court that says this is my property, this is my house, this is my real asset. That's something that we're exploring in the UAE. It's pretty exciting. On the other side, the other project that we're doing and we announced I think last week or the week before is tokenizing real estate financing. And we have this big deal that we announced with a real estate developer called Mag Group, tokenizing $500 million of one of their off-plan developments called Couture Reserve. They don't really need to do it because they could either just sell the property themselves or take bank financing or doing this Islamic financing method called Sukuk. So they don't need to use a tokenized financing offering to do this, but there's kind of two reasons why I think it's interesting. The first being that, one, you're getting this like ability to subscribe to this product both in fiat and in crypto. So that's one. You're getting an additional exposure to our token because we're effectively subsidizing the yield. So you're getting stablecoin payments over the course of the tenure of the instrument plus additional exposure. So you can effectively get like a safe 8% yield in this case per annum plus additional exposure in our token. So you can effectively speculate on Ohm, which is great, I guess. And then you also have this like over collateralization of the underlying real estate asset. So it's all 100% backed. It's super safe from that perspective. So you're getting both the ability to participate in the financing of that property, and then you can actually take your principal and turn it into the house at the end of the day. So you can participate on both sides of it if you so choose, or you can just take your principal back. So that's something you can't really do, or they don't really do that much now as a like smaller ticket investor. Like you're not financing $100,000 into a real estate development and then turning around and then buying a house with it. Doesn't exist today. So obviously tokenization can help that. So okay, I'll shut up for the real estate side, but those are two real actual cases that are happening like now.
Yeah, maybe like also to draw like a picture for the future, how do you guys see it come together? Like will people actually know that they interact with a chain here in regards to tokenization, or like in JP's example, won't even really necronize? They shouldn't. Like, what do you guys think?
Well, I think that a large portion of what makes these things better than off-chain assets, like, what is the additional layer of like programmability and composability, and like the assets become more useful. And there will always be this sort of like bleeding edge of like novel DeFi application that like the user can interact with the chain and use these assets to do. So for example, like today, if you borrow on Flux, like against your like OUSG, which is like an Ondo like tokenized like T-bill, that's like a pretty novel application of it, right? It's an on-chain like treasury repo. And for the average user, like they never had access to that kind of market off-chain. So all of a sudden, their asset becomes more useful. And going forward in the future, it can be like, with like USDY, you can use it as collateral on Drift for like, perps trading. So if you want to go like giga max long dogwoof hat, like with T-bills backing your position, like you can do that. And so I think like for some set of power users out there, they're going to want to explore like the newest, most interesting use cases, and to the degree that like the like compliance world will allow it, like we should do that. I think for most users, like obviously we don't want them on chain. Sometimes I do things on chain. I'm like, I'd really rather not be doing this, like just for security purposes. But it's always going to be a mix, right?
Yeah, I think totally aligned on that. I think the next step also is liquidity. Composability is key. Liquidity is, I think, in the end game. Main asset in TradFi, in the real world, if we can say that, are not liquid. And so crypto offers this capacity to organize an infrastructure that connect everyone, and also gives the possibility to people to own their own asset. And beyond tokenization, when you speak to tokenization, you're right saying that there is few tokenizers, and sometimes they are not totally tokenizing the ownership, or sometimes with a risk of counterparty risk. And this is quite important, I think. And for that, regulation needs to change a lot to offer a direct ownership on the real world asset. If it's T-bill, I really prefer to have a product like yours that is fully segregated, with not a lot of structuration, with counterparty risk, third parties that are in the mix of the setup, and having something that is like pristine, and that will ensure that the user will have something safe. And that's very important when you want to bridge something from the real world to DeFi. The second aspect is clearly, I think the next liquidity in crypto in general will come from the TradFi. And TradFi DeFi is just that there is no possibility to interrupt between old mechanism, old infrastructure, and the actual one that we want to develop, because we think that it is better. And so clearly we need to try to work also to issue natively some asset. You are speaking about T-bills, but wrapping T-bills is just having, tokenizing is just wrapping something that is in paper. I think the next step is just to tokenize T-bills and just issue T-bills. And at this moment, it will be the end game, because the whole infrastructure will have changed, And I have no doubt in 10 years that every state will issue their own T-bills in a form of a token, because it's the next step for the whole TradFi to change and use blockchain infrastructure to exchange value. So that's quite important that we focus on having, a moment where those tokenizers are like a bridge, and we do need to have good tokenizers that segregate the risk, but on the long term, a part of those guys will not be needed anymore, because clearly a part of this asset will be natively issued on-chain. I will not see, we mentioned Tesla stocks and so on. Clearly that doesn't make sense to have paper in 2030 and something like that. So it's 2030. It's really a need to have some assets that are natively issued on-chain.
I mean, I 100% agree with that. Blockchain is a perfect financial ledger, so why don't we use it for finance? That being said, the user experience is still horrendous. But to your point, like, you probably don't want to do everything on-chain just yet today. And if you think about it now, right, like, the people who actually are going to be interacting with this stuff on-chain are still crypto natives. So, like, you need to have a, RWA distribution strategy, which actually crypto native people want. That means you need to have products that are actually attractive to them. And, novel use cases and composable, like, venues for people to actually do stuff with it that's more used to what they would be doing in DeFi. Otherwise, they're not going to adopt it, and you're going to have issues there. So that's why we take this approach of having like a permissionless layer to the L1, which anyone can read and write and do whatever they want on the chain, or just open DeFi kind of concept, and then the permission layer that you can interact with the same wallet from. That being said, today's RWA users will not be tomorrow's, and tomorrow's users are going to frankly not want to have to deal with wallets and all the other bullshit that we put up with on a day in and day out basis. You just need to make the user experience better. In the end of the day, they want access to products, and if it's better on chain, that's great, but they don't need to know that it's on a chain, and they don't even need to, like, I say this as a builder of a L1, like, in 5 years, you shouldn't even know that you're on Mantra.
Yeah,
maybe less, honestly. Like, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, this is like something that we talked about since, I would say, 2021, when the first DeFi applications really became popular. And I think what I hear a lot is like composability. The reason why we want to bring those assets on-chain is because it's much more capital efficient. Imagine you could take your home, you need a loan real quick, and you can deposit it, like broadly speaking, into a liquidity pool. So yeah, the capital efficiency part makes just sense because banks are closed on Saturdays, and on Sunday, and blockchain solves a lot of these problems. This is why it makes sense to bring certain assets on chain. I think that's clear. But let's talk a little bit about the risk, because JP, you mentioned the example of the authorities that help you to tokenize these RWAs. But let's bring like a kind of maybe a crazy example into this picture. Say I tokenize my house and I go to a liquidity pool and I say, look, I need money very fast. I don't have the time to go to a bank. I basically take advantage of the capital efficiency that crypto provides. I put my house into, like, as in form of a token, of course, into this pool. Now this pool gets exploited. I still have the key. I still theoretically am the owner, but am I really the owner?
So it's a good question. I mean, I think what we're exploring in this instance is, it's kind of, you can use an even more wild example, right? Like, you can't have the simple, like, Uniswap style anything for anything model for swapping these assets. Because imagine if you, paired a house or treasury bills with, like, a Pokemon card. People are obviously going to find more value. Some people might find more value in the Pokemon card, but others very well may not. So I think you need to kind of take that idea of how we operate in DeFi out of it a little bit, and it's not going to be exactly the same. And particularly in this real estate example that you just suggested, there would have to be rules about how these things can be bought and sold, right? Otherwise, you could have things like where you exploit the the liquidity pool in that instance. And I think one of the things that we're exploring tends to be a little bit more like auction windows, where you have windows for where you can have liquidity. That doesn't mean you're going to sell it necessarily. And this is talking about like whole properties, right? Not like pieces of it or fractionalized. So if you're talking about whole assets, I think it's a different thing than like a fraction of something. Because obviously, like, if you have a house that's divided into 1 million tokens out there. Like, unless someone goes and buys all 1 million of them, they don't actually own the thing. You know, they're buying it for not to live in it. They're buying it probably for some sort of rental yield, and they're attracted in the asset that's backing it, the token, not necessarily because they're trying to own the whole thing, and actually that's their place of where they want to live, right? So I think it does depend a little bit on the use cases, and we are exploring the edge cases as well, because there's a lot of them. Yeah. Yes, I think so.
I mean, so in this whole world of ours, like, the question of who owns the house is really like who's allowed to live in the house, right? Or who's allowed to rent the house out. And that's like defined ultimately by like an off-chain court system. So for a lot of these things, like, we're used to thinking of them in the like cyberpunk, like, if I steal the entire liquidity pool, do I own all of the houses? Like, and I think ultimately it would come down to like the courts at that point. It's interesting, this like house example, right? Because it's like, it's so tangible to everyone, but like in practice, there are big issues around liquidity with this. And so at Ondo, like, why did we do like T-bills first? Like, we saw that we thought we needed to start in what effectively is the most liquid market off-chain, and then we can bootstrap that liquidity on-chain. But in a lot of cases, I think what we're gonna see is, maybe like a tokenized house works well in like a borrow-lend protocol, but it doesn't work well in Uniswap. Yeah. So what do? Well, we have like the deed tokenization issuer like linked into the person's like home mortgage account issuer, and if they want it in a tokenized format and they want to like take advantage of borrow-lend, like they can do that. But I think like it's a little bit. Like, this is why like real estate tokenization never worked in the past, right? It's just like there was not enough liquidity for these like super non-fungible assets. If you look at like any NFT like fractionalization, it really didn't work well at all, other than maybe like that one Doge that like mooned. But like, I think when we think about the future, and this is where Ondo's like a little bit differentiated, I think we see a lot more cross communication between the chain and like the existing financial entities, especially for things like liquidity, where like it really is pretty capital inefficient to bootstrap this stuff like directly on chain.
Yeah, I think real world asset, and we spoke a lot about real estate, I think, since 10 years in crypto. I think the last thing that will be on chain is real estate, because it's
disagree.
Yeah, we can have a debate. I will argue. So I think this stuff is too much complicated. What is the loan to value of an house? What is the process of liquidation of this house when you make a loan? How you ensure that the revenue made by your rent will be distributed to the shareholders of this asset. So this, I think, the whole model is okay to implement it, but there is so much friction in the actual regulation that make this subject very complicated.
100% agree with that.
Okay.
But I disagree with the fact that it will be coming on chain. And
it will.
I mean, we will do it like literally within this next 6 months. I 100% promise that.
What time then?
Sorry?
What time?
Within this year. Okay. Guarantee, full stop. That being said, like, will it have all of the bells and whistles that you mentioned? Obviously not, right? This is a step-by-step process. The first step that we're working on is actually just the title deed itself, and it'll be a whole property, one of them, right? And we are kind of working with both the supply and demand side on this. It's a pilot, but you're also doing it in conjunction with the sovereign government, right? So it needs to work. The second step is fractionalizing that, and then I think the third step is actually how do you make this composable, how do you interact, or enable all these other things that you mentioned. It will take time, but so I guess it's more, I disagree only on the idea that it depends on how you actually describe what is tokenization, right? So
I think we kind of agree. I think the main question is what is the timeline, but
within this year, 100%.
Yeah. Okay.
That's maybe cool. It's also the question of what is like more popular, more adopted. I believe we also have already cases of things where something like where real estate has been on chain, but I think it's technically easier to tokenize a stock because you can use it much more efficiently.
Other than the regulational part.
Yeah.
The regulatory part of stock tokenization is a problem.
GP, you mentioned something that is truly true, is that the first token that is like a wrapped version of a UST bill is Tether. And those guys are making that it's 10 years with no transparency and all the stuff that everyone knows, but this is something that exists since a long time. The question is mainly, absolutely the regulation. But I think it's critical for DeFi to have a pristine collateral. I think what you are trying to do, having USDY, right?
Yeah,
and OUSG.
the Y stands for yield.
Yeah, yeah. But no, it's the yield is a component that is mandatory. You know, nobody in TradFi will give you money and expect that the future cash flow will go to Tether. Nobody, JP Morgan will not use Tether to bridge with DeFi, with TradFi, and TradFi from DeFi. So clearly, you need to have something that is pristine, that give a direct exposure for your future cash flow through a T-bill. That is an asset that will be used in DeFi, and that will be the common asset for DeFi as a collateral. So clearly, the next step after that is to have regulations that offer not just tokenized T-bill, but tokenized stock. And the end game is to issue directly stocks on chain. But I think this will happen very, very soon, because it's really, in terms of tech, it's nothing. It's just it's a wrapper, needs to be regulated and ensured that there is no counterparty risk. And after that, it's just, for the moment, we have a status quo, and we have a lot of actors that don't want that. It's the same for stablecoin with electronic money, where we see that everyone wants to put the collateral in banks because they just want different traditional banks. It's just a matter of monopoly in certain sense. And so we will see that in the future with stocks, because clearly the second thing after T-bill that makes sense is stock on chain. Yeah.
Maybe I can give a spicy take in response. I think with stocks, it's actually like more complicated than people tend to think, right? Like, it's pretty easy to like hold a share somewhere, create an ERC20 with like a whitelist, and like issue it. And then, you know, maybe you do one of every stock in the S&P 500, and you put out an announcement on LinkedIn, always on LinkedIn, not on Twitter, that says, we have tokenized the world's first S&P 500 fund. Every stock will be on chain someday. It's really the liquidity, right? Like that's sort of like the most difficult thing. And whenever you fragment liquidity across a number of venues, you face some costs, right? And I think one of the things that crypto really brings to the table with tokenized assets is this ability to have instant settlement, you know, 24/7, send and receive, transparency, all of this. So like the demand is there for USDT, USDC, USDY, like all of these products today to have all of these things. But for most equities, most people don't really want to trade them outside of like the current trading hours. Like there isn't enough demand, probably, like that's our view, to have like replicated liquidity also on chain for these things. And so the way that we sort of see it is like, why don't we issue these things as like certificates of ownership effectively? And then you can use the tokens in DeFi or like for whatever other benefits that you get from being on chain, without having the trading actually take place on chain. I think we're going to see most of the liquidity, buying and selling and all of that, still happening in people's brokerage accounts. But the brokerage account can also, in turn, mint a token that can be used as collateral in DeFi and all that.
I'd actually take the counter to that. And I'll just say, from our perspective, I live in Hong Kong, right? So I think maybe if there's a US versus like international, and I was actually on a panel with Justin at Consensus and Carlos, and we were having this like US nexus versus rest of world, nexus conversation or debate. And I think from what we see in developing markets, they do want to trade US stocks any time of the day. They're like, honestly, Asians are degenerate gamblers. I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm married to one, and we work with them all the time, right? But they want to speculate, and they want to do it in hours that work for them, and that is not in U.S. market trading hours.
Yeah, I think it's really about, and this is what I learned like from my Cosmos experience, like communities, if you want to put it like this, are so different. People in Turkey engage with crypto much differently compared to people in Berlin, compared to people in Hong Kong, compared to people in New York. It's also a cultural thing. But yeah, the time is moving very fast here. But I think like the TLDR is here really that the on-chain component can make like the TradFi industry much more efficient, and there are like a lot of composability parts where it just makes sense to bring real-world assets on-chain. And yeah, what sticks very to me is like that a lot of people underestimate how tricky it actually is to bring stocks on-chain, whereas something tangible like like a real estate might be actually almost a little bit easier. So yeah, thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, JP. Thank you guys, for listening, and and giving it over to Nena.